Okay, tonight we're going to continue on page 92. And we're dealing with this rather lengthy exchange teaching between Master Hui Neng and this monk called Zhi Cheng. What does Zhi Cheng mean here? Let's see. Anybody know the translation of his name? Sometimes that's interesting. The Zhi Cheng. Any quick? Going once, going twice. The Zhi and the Cheng. Louder. It's Zhi Cheng.
The first story?
That's who we're talking about tonight.
Which one is it?
Don't do this to me either. that. Which one is it? The Zhi? Is it Zhi way to Zhi or?
No, I don't know.
Well, you just go to the back where the Chinese, yeah.
Zhi's intention is Cheng is sincere.
Oh, sincere intention or sincere, okay. Yeah, that's a good name, huh? His intention is very sincere. It's totally appropriate. Okay, so tonight I want to go into at least most of page 92, and then also tonight I promise we go into the second half of the contemplative practice, the five skandhas sort of laboratory approach. Some of you probably were or were not here last week. Last week we did section 1 of that. Tonight we're going to do section 2, and then next Friday we'll finish up with 3. So we've taken the five skandhas as a concept that's very central to this teaching, and then tried to bring it into some kind of pragmatic existential application through what we call a lab exercise. So we've worked it into a bit of a lab exercise that one can use. That isn't to necessarily say it's easier, but at least it's a little more accessible, and it shows that most of these key concepts like this are actually designed for application, not even just meditation, nor even contemplation, but rather for application. These are meant to be keys that unlock something within ourselves, liberative tools. But that being said, as tools, you have to pick them up and use them. And so often, if you have a good experience, you have the good benefit to have an experience with a teacher, a clinician, let's use that word. You learn how to reanimate or to decode these into actual practice. And oftentimes you'll be in the midst of going through a practical experience with a teacher in a community or something and not realize that this is actually a manifestation of the text. It's the text in a living form. And so the principles, the theory, and the actual events and concrete realities of your life are totally interwoven in this way. So that's a really good teacher, a good teaching place where you actually see the sutras and these principles embodied in walking, standing, sitting, lying down, and everything you do. There's a constant interconnection. The Avatamsaka calls it interpenetration without obstruction of this. But in our text, what we're reading here, we see the concepts and we see some exchange happening and we see a liberation going on, but we didn't quite unpack how did that actually happen. And sometimes it's more obvious than others. So tonight we're dealing with Zhi Cheng, and basically Zhi Cheng came in from Shenzhou. He was practicing sincerely. He was practicing, and I would say a more rather formal way. He was formally holding the precepts. He was formally doing meditation practice. And he was studying and reading the text. But the inner transformation, the internalization hadn't yet really occurred. And so there was him as a student studying this, doing the meditation, not being the meditation, holding the precepts instead of becoming the precepts. And as a result, having ideas about wisdom, but not embodying wisdom. So the Sixth Patriarch often calls this disembodied wisdom. It's wisdom that we think about, that sometimes we can articulate, but doesn't manifest in our life, in our actual behavior, in our decisions, in our choices. Only afterwards, like, gee, if I had been more wise, I would have done this or that. But the real wisdom he's talking about, he says, it's so immediate. It's just like a martial artist in the midst of battle, just turning and ready to go without a thought. That's what the Sixth Patriarch calls his kind of wisdom. So it's immediate, it's spontaneous, but it doesn't mean it's magical or mystical. It's immediate and spontaneous because there's nothing obstructing its manifestation. There's no ego, there's no attachments, there's no negative emotions, there's no thirsting or craving or fear, anything like this. So that ability to be totally responsive and right on is there at all times. So we're on the page of top of 92. Anyhow, I don't know that our lab exercise will get us there, but it's an attempt, anyhow, to get us there with the martial artist kind of. Anyhow, he speaks this verse that we mentioned last week. And in this verse, I think we see two of the issues that he was stuck on. And often what happens is the place where someone is stuck or attached or a little confused is exactly the place where the teacher, in this case Hui Neng, applies the energy. He puts the screws sort of turning here. And he's been doing this with Zhi Chung all along. And then when the disciple or the student gets it, understands, there's a release. It's like ice melting. And as a result, and sometimes as with ice melting, ice turns to water, pent-up emotions or confusion often turn to tears. And so there can often be tears of joy, tears of regret. Tears have, the dimension of what tears represent can go from funerals to weddings to everything in between. And sometimes they're just cathartic letting go. We let go finally when something pent up, and there's a release in terms of tears. There's a philosopher who once talked about the tears of the saints as being a kind of crying that had to do with insight and compassion and understanding for the human condition. And it's very interesting. In this case, he has this verse that he offers in gratitude for, and it shows the two areas, I think, where he's had a breakthrough. So he says the 5 heaps, and we have it blocked, Sanskrit, the skandhas, an illusory body. And how could an illusion be ultimate? Even wanting to reach the truly soul means the method is not yet pure. So what I'm suggesting here, there's many ways. There's not a single way that one interprets these. And there's no way we could probably convey the emotive pathos that he's feeling in writing this, because these are words to us. But for him, this is really something extremely profound and transformative that he's expressing here. He's saying, basically, the 5 heaps, the skandhas, and we've talked about this a couple of times, is a Buddhist understanding or framing of the human being, the mind-body continuum. And he's saying the mind-body continuum, as I imagine it, as I construct it, not in an enlightened way, but in an ordinary, confused way, taking this mind-body continuum to be a permanent, stable, unchanging me or mine, that illusion is what he's talking about. He's not talking about getting rid of the body or getting rid of the mind. He's saying, I'm using it in a confused and misguided way. And that's the illusoriness he's talking about. I'm seeing these 5 elements, the 5 phenomena of human existence as something real and tangible and permanent, when in fact, they aren't. So we'll go into this more. So then he say, how could such an illusion then be an ultimate? If it's an illusory, kind of like a dream and a bubble and illusion, it couldn't be ultimate because it passes. It's not stable and constant. So his first thing is, associated with this, is he's moving from the sort of formal meditative practice of seeking enlightenment through the rigors of cultivation, maybe some asceticism, since he's a monk, and so he's doing some of that, but he's seeing it as somehow associated to the body, and he's saying the illusory body. So this goes back to a very basic principle that although you meditate and hold precepts and study the text and so forth, These are merely fingers pointing to the moon. They aren't the moon itself. These are expedient devices to catalyze an understanding within yourself to realize, oh, I had it all along. There's nothing to seek or get. With that realization, your practice doesn't stop. It just enters a different phase or a different awareness. So in that sense, it goes to a very important line that this ground of awakening has no marks or appearances about it. It's not in physical states of levitation or kind of transcendental bliss where you're always walking out with a cheese-eating grin smile on your face because you're blissed out. And it's not in signs and omens. It's not in any of these phenomenological things that you would say it exists. So that's his first realization, that it's not in this which is illusory and passing. But it isn't to say that there's nothing at all. It just isn't that. Is that clear? Because at this point, he was asking about meditation. He was seeing it as an external practice that brought about certain results. And what the Sixth Patriarch is saying, now that you understand that there's nothing to get, nothing to attain, that this was just expedient devices to get you to let go, you can then let go of seeking results from your practice. Now, you have to be careful with this. It doesn't mean you stop practicing. You move your practice to the point where you're not seeking anything from it. I don't know if that makes sense. Okay? It's a very different state of mind. My teacher used to express it this way: you eat, you sleep, you wear clothes, and you practice. You don't add any more to it, like looking for altered states of consciousness after your meal or in your sleep, or special levitation with your clothes, or profound meaning from clothes. You do it as an ordinary thing. And the reason you do it an ordinary thing because it keeps you in a corrective state of equanimity and balance, whereas you're not moving off center. And by not moving off center, there's nothing to seek because center is all you have and need. That's sort of how you see your practice. And so it's very ordinary. You don't come on Friday night and say, tonight's the night. I'm going to see Guan Yin. See that statue come alive and rub the crown on my head. Not anybody else's, just my crown. You're not looking for that. You're not seeking for that. So that's the first thing. And even wanting to reach the truly soul means the method is not yet pure. Now he's gone to the other level. He said not only not seeking in his signs and physicality and so forth and omens, but even wanting to seek it, even wanting to reach the truly soul, meaning bodhi, enlightenment, awakening, means the method is not yet pure. So seeking anything at all is off, misguided. This is really critical. This is where texts like the Shurangama Sutra are extremely important. And these texts are meant for people who are cultivating and seriously trying to unite with their spiritual nature. And that text again and again and again starts out by saying, the wondrous brightness of full awakening is whole and complete in every living being. It's not more in a Buddha and less than an ordinary person. And there's nothing to seek, nothing to wish for. Simply uncover, let go of that which obstructs that. And it manifests by itself as just totally naturally, as the sun is there when the clouds disperse, the sun is still there. It's just covered over by clouds. The Shurangama goes into it, and then it goes into, when it gets into advanced stages of meditation practice, it says, in the process of letting go and breaking through these obstructions, releases of consciousness happen. Consciousness begins to open and unfold. And for us, where it's been cramped down for a long time, we suddenly think, wow, that's awesome. I often compare it to if you've been sitting here tonight and your leg falls asleep. Sometimes it happens. Or your whole body falls asleep, but your leg falls asleep, and when you go out, you feel like, I don't have a leg, it's not there, or your arm falls asleep. And then suddenly the tingling returns and you have a feeling, oh my gosh, But it's only because it was tourniqueted off that it seems fantastic when the circulation comes back. Once the circulation is back, it's just normal and natural. In the same way, if we tourniquet by cutting off our consciousness from its natural full expansive state, when we untie a knot that's been constricting it, we go, wow, far out. And the sage says it's only far out because you've been so far gone. You know, there's, as a text says, it's only because of stupidity that wisdom makes a mark. There's a very interesting way of expressing it. So what it's saying is, when the Shrangam is saying, when you go through this, don't get all excited and ripped out of shape and think, oh my gosh, I'm a Buddha, I'm a sage, I'm an Arhat, because this opening of consciousness occurred. It's just a natural return. It's just a natural coming back to your original ground. But because we've drifted so far away, it seems mysterious and profound and far out and so forth. And then the text warns, do not seek anything in your cultivation. Simply see this, watch it, and move on. Don't take it as anything special, nor be afraid of it. Because in the process of doing this, often buried, hidden seeds of consciousness, of things done, or things imagined, can arise too as it opens and expands. And then you can mistake this and get afraid, and you paralyze yourself either way. So the Shrangam is very clear about this and working through. And it always goes back, at the place of seeking nothing, there's no worries. You will just like a hot knife go through butter. But as soon as there's seeking or wanting of anything, ever so subtle, you will then, when a state arises, get stuck. Either in fear or in fondness. Either you're feeling you're a demon or you're a Buddha, either way. And so he's had this realization now. Now, the master then follows this by saying to him, in this long passage, and I'll go through it, otherwise there's no hope that we're going to finish this semester. Okay, so Master Hui Neng says to Zhi Cheng, your master is meaning Shen Shou, his teacher from before. And I'm saying before because it seems as if he's now really taken Hui Neng as his teacher. But it doesn't mean he's rejected him. I want to be really clear about this. It's only because of Shen Shou's really good teaching and example that he was able to get to the point of asking these questions and inquiring of the Sixth Patriarch. You see what I mean? It's not like, oh, one's better or worse, that Shen Shou is the bad guy and this is the good guy, Hui Neng. Actually, it's very much like Sudna in his pilgrimage, where he goes from master to master. Each master he goes to, he learns and acquires all wonderful things, and then the teacher says, well, you've learned everything I can teach you, now it's time for you to go on. Go south and you'll find another teacher called so-and-so. And he goes through 52 or 53 teachers in succession like this. Each one of them is a cumulative building of his knowledge, of his understanding, and a decumulation of his attachments, because he's not ready to go from first to last. He has to gradually go along. And each one of those teachers is a really good and wise knowing advisor, even though they move him along in a progression. Now, what's curious about Sudna's journey is that the teacher he starts with, Manjushri, is the teacher he ends with. It's Manjushri. So there's something in that message of he went full circle, came back to where he started. It's beautiful. Okay, he says, your master's morality, concentration, wisdom, the three non-outflow studies of Shila, Samadhi, Prajna, exhorts those with lesser capacities for wisdom. My morality, concentration, and wisdom motivates with the greater capacity. He's just talking about capacity as it's manifesting at a particular time. He's not saying, oh, these are for dummies and these are for the really smart ones. He's just saying, as appropriate. People whose capacity is a little constrained have to start with something a little more basic and expedient. The basic nature is whole and complete, but the capacity for the expression and fulfillment of that may be limited. And it's not limited by, genetics or something. It's limited by our own attachments and karma. So it's, in a sense, what we bring to the discussion, our potentials, our capacities, is accumulation of both good and not so good that we've cultivated ourselves. We are an instrument that we come. Maybe partially tuned, a little bit out of tune, really out of tune, a couple strings missing, cracks in the body, unglued, and so the master doesn't start to say, okay, on this piano that's missing 20 strings and is cracked, I'm not going to play a Mozart sonata. I'm going to start putting the strings and everything back, and it's like, oh, I want to play Mozart. Well, I know, but you got strings missing, the pedals are gone and so forth. You have to get your capacity up. When the capacity is there, then we can do a Mozart sonata. Okay? Oh, okay. So he's just talking about it in that way. He's not talking about some absolute sense or in some derogatory sense. He's just talking about it in a clinical sense. I teach according to capacities. Whatever someone can hold, I teach to that level, and a good teacher teaches just a little bit beyond that, what you can't hold. It just pushes you a little bit beyond what you can grasp. Otherwise, there's no growth. And there's arrogance, and then with arrogance, there's no growth anyhow. So, if you awaken to your essential nature, your true nature, you do not set up ideas of bodhi or nirvana or liberated knowing and seeing. That goes back to his previous, even wanting to reach the truly so. You don't set these up. And the Sixth Patriarch means by this teaching, he says later in various passages, he says, a cultivator of the way, externally meeting all the conditions and appearances of the world, is not attached and not moved, is aware of them but is not turned by them. That's external. And internally, that cultivator doesn't set up ideas of attainment or nirvana or bodhi or dwell in emptiness either. So he does an internal, external thing. How do you tell somebody who's really practicing? Externally, they move through the world unencumbered, free and at ease, not making mistakes in cause and effect, appropriately responding and doing things as they should be done. Internally, they're not attached to emptiness or to the meditative stillness or they're, I've got bodhi or something. So this is the description of a liberated person, a liberated, cultivated person. He says, only when you understand, this is a very important line, only when you understand there's nothing to attain can you set up all the myriad teachings. Wow. Now, there's many ways to interpret this, but setting up the teachings means all the teachings are set up for a reason. And the reason is the confused sickness of the patients called living beings. The teachings are not set up in some sort of vacuum in outer space. And then, as absolute dogma or truth. The teachings only arise because there is a knotting of human potential. This is really key. And you see in an earlier part, he says all the teachings, all the sutras, all the divisions come about only because of confused people. Not for any. If there were no confused people needing this medicine, the teachings would not come about. So the teachings are actually responsive, compassionate response to the suffering and confusion of living beings. They're not out there a priori, because there would be no reason to have them if there wasn't confusion, as the nature is whole and complete. You see, so it's sort of like he's saying, one hand, it seems like he's dismissing the teachings, but he's not. He's simply saying they exist for only that reason, as liberated techniques to return you back to your original nature, your original ground. Once you're there, there's no reason for further teachings. They're only therapeutic in the sense that they're corrective. Orthopraxic. So they suck you back into proper form, like orthodontists straighten your teeth. Once the teeth are straightened, would you walk around wearing the braces? No. Unless you couldn't afford to pay your final bill, they wouldn't take them off. But generally, you take the braces off and the teeth are straight. So the same is with the teaching. You take these away when not. But now, why does he say there's nothing to attain? He doesn't say, only when you realize there is nothing can you set up the teachings. Careful. This is where people kind of go wrong into a nihilism. He's not saying there's nothing. There is the wondrous fullness of true enlightenment and so on and so forth. All these called permanence, purity, true self, and bliss, the four virtues of nirvana. He's saying, but only when you realize that it's not something you get from outside, that you attain or win or purchase or buy or pray for or whatever. That's the difference. When you realize that, can you set up a teaching and it can be a liberated technique? But if you don't understand this, you can set up teachings and not only they can be confusing, they can be detrimental. Because people then start seeking and wanting something from the teaching towards this goal, missing the whole idea that it's only an inducement or an expedient device to get you to let go, release your hold. This is really, really important. So again, he's basically, if you go back before, remember he said, I don't have a teaching. I simply untie knots and expediently call that a teaching. This is the difference here that's so important. Now, he says, if you understand in this way, you can become a teacher. You can teach. Because you know the ultimate goal is to get people to return back to their original nature, which because of confusion and misunderstanding, they strayed from. And then they've strayed so long, habitually we forget it was there to begin with. And we think we don't have it. And we think we're totally empty and bereft of it. And so the teacher's job is to rekindle the memory of this original nature, however means he can, through precepts, through goodness, through kindness, sometimes through scolding, to get us to wake up from this sense that we don't have it wholly complete. That's why, and there's a famous text that says, in this path, in this way, this Tao, this Marga, the only motion is returning. The only motion is returning, going back to the root, returning to the roots. And the only useful quality is letting go. Not grabbing, not attaining. So if you think about it, returning, letting go, you return by letting go. And as you let go, you return. And so it's going back to this original. And I say original not because it's back in time. It's here and now. It's fundamental. But even in the here and now, we can't seem to find it. So this is how it goes. If you understand this, then you are embodying the Buddha. You are literally Chinese manifesting body, manifesting Buddha body, speaking Dharma. It means you embody it. And embody the Buddha doesn't mean you sit outside, get a little stoned, and go, come on, Buddha, come on, Buddha. And then all of a sudden in the movies, whether, whoever it is, you see this little light trickle down, goes inside, and, I imagine, because this is what happens with Keanu Reeves plays the Buddha and stuff. And, what it's talking about is the Buddha within becomes totally manifest. Embody the Buddha means you become the Buddha you already are. You realize your Buddha nature. It doesn't mean you are a channeler of the Buddha. You know what I mean by channeler? Channeling? Very California. What's channeling? I know it's on the TV, but anybody want to explain channeling? Huh?
You become a medium, or
you become a medium for another being, another source, right? So there's people that you can go online tonight, look up channeling. You got all kinds of people who are channeling, all these different names,
They speak through you.
They speak through you. You become a sort of impersonal conduit for the enlightened being. It could be Tom in, this heaven, or Jerry this place, or usually they have more exotic names. It's not Tom and Jerry. And then you speak through. And there's variations of this, but it's a big thing, right? And people will pay money to you if you can channel. So, if you're thinking, what should I do for a career? You get the ACT, SAT, and all that crap. Don't even bother about that. Just learn to be a channeler. Just in Southern California alone, you could go strong channeling. People like to tune into that. I mean, you're looking at it like, what? No, they really do.
Yes.
Yeah, I know.
In ancient time, the witch, that's the witch job.
Well, I don't call it witches, but it's, at different times it's called different things. The correct word now is channeling. It's not witchcraft, but it's very popular. But again, if you don't realize there's nothing to attain, you'll be drawn to this. You'll be attracted to this, thinking, oh, I don't have it, I'm incomplete, I need to get it from the power source out there, right? And now it's really easy because you can put it on credit cards. You can actually PayPal your way okay? So if you understand this, you are also called Bodhi and Nirvana. This is liberated knowing and seeing. This is your knowing and seeing liberated from all constraints. Those who see their essential nature can set up these or not as they choose. They come and go. And here's a beautiful description of somebody who has now realized the state. They can come and go freely, unhindered and spontaneous. Everything they do and all their words are appropriate, timely, and according to need. Wherever and however they appear, they never depart from the inherent nature. They are just realizing the spiritual powers of self-mastery and the samadhi of playfulness. This is called seeing the nature. So this is a wonderful description of someone who is totally present, totally in the world, not removed from the world, and yet not turned or confused by it. In the state, and it says they're free and spontaneous. Why are they free and spontaneous? It doesn't mean because they don't follow the rules. It's because they have so mastered the rules of causality, they don't make errors in cause and effect. Not because they're incapable of doing that. It's because they really are so attuned before they even act or say something. Even before the thought is able to catch hold, they can see where it's going and it doesn't take root. This is what it means to have self-mastery. It doesn't mean they're above causation. It means they are so sensitive and so attuned that even the pre-thought to move across what was propriety or to move out of the form of what is right doesn't even have a chance to take hold. This is what he calls, and that's why it can seem like they're playful, because they have an easiness about them. But it isn't an easiness that comes from being sort of uninhibited. It's an easiness that comes from being completely unconstrained by a kind of deviation of the essential human nature. They are so attuned, so right on, that it seems artless. And when you meet people like this, when you see them, you're moved even before they speak, because they have qualities of character and resonance and wholesomeness that almost put out light and energy that you're moved by. They're almost transparent in their sincerity and their goodness. This is how they're often described. And it's said people like this, even when you see them from behind at a distance, you're moved. This is the quality of virtue, it's called. The virtue is the strength that comes from being complete in yourself, seeking nothing outside, and being the total perfection of the human. This is radiant virtue, it's called. And it's actually quite eloquently described in many texts. And that's why you can see in these texts, the disciples that left the Buddha, the 4 disciples who were the recipients of the turning of the wheel for the first time, when the Buddha came from his awakening experience in full transformation, they said, we're going to not pay attention to him. We're not going to, because he's the one that left. He's the one that gave up on what we were practicing. But when they saw him, even from a distance, they could not restrain themselves by saying, let's ask him what he's been doing. Before he even spoke a word, the wheel was turned by his embodiment of a transformation. This is really interesting because the words help and the words point, but the embodiment speaks much more strongly. And this is something, by the way, that you don't have to be a sage or mystic to see. A 3-year-old can spot these qualities in a person. We can too. Sometimes we outsmart ourselves. Well, their resume, their CV, so-and-so recommended them, I was reminded of this event when there was a debate, a presidential debate on television, and a friend of mine who worked in a hospital was working on a ward where everybody was deaf. And so they were watching the debate, but they weren't listening to the debate, obviously, because they couldn't hear it. And uniformly, whenever, I won't say now who the candidates were, you can just imagine, when candidate A spoke, they all went, and when candidate B spoke, they all, they're all laughing. And the guy was saying, how can you, well, he's not sincere, he's lying. And they said, how did you know you can't hear him? And they turn to him and says, what, are you blind? So what I'm suggesting to you is we have this innate sensibility to see and to feel these things and respond to them. And it's only we outsmart ourselves sometime by doing rationalizations about this or that. So this is what's being talked about here. So I will pause here now to maybe spend the rest of the time for this second phase. How many of you tried the first phase last week? You don't have to report, no book reports, just you experimented with a little bit. If you don't remember, I guess you can go back to is it recorded, Locke?
Yes.
Okay, so then I won't bother to go over it again, because if I keep going over the things that the people the week before weren't here for, since not everybody comes every week, I wouldn't even have gotten to this chapter we're in now. So let's move on. This is the second part. The first part was, and the first two parts have to do with meditation practice. So you're actually sitting down or sitting or standing, and you can do this if you're doing walking meditation. Any time of the day that you take 15 minutes to an hour away from all your normal activity to quietly reflect or just be still, then you can exercise this type of analytical meditation or contemplative practice. There's many, many ways to do meditation, to do contemplation. Some you use a mantra or a mudra. Some you do breath counting. There's all kinds. This one particularly comes from more the school of shamatha vipassana that has to do with a kind of engaged contemplative inquiry consisting of calm and insight, or stopping and contemplating. So there's a little back and forth going here. And the contemplating is both a passive contemplating, observing and letting things manifest, but it's also a applied contemplation where you're doing a little analytical work with the theory to look at what's happening. So it's a blend here. So in phase 2, what we do, we use a sitting meditation, and I'll read you right from our exercise. You bring the mind to centering. You bring your mind, your concentration to centering through the use of contemplating a mantra, your breathing, silent recitation, or whatnot. So in other words, you start your meditation as you normally do. The eyes regard the nose regards the mouth regards the dantian. You relax your whole body, you get your breathing, the basics of sitting meditation practice, and you bring your centering down, the centering practice. This step is referred to the stopping or calming of the mind, shamatha, or in Chinese, that's the zhi. So you're stopping. You're stopping in the sense that you're letting the 10,000 things return to one. All the distractions and busyness is pushed aside for the ability to just drop into the center and let things be still. Now, here's where it moves them. The momentary stopping then provides a platform or an observation point from which you can watch the mind right as it begins to stir. So rather than trying to stop thought or just stopping, you use it as a backdrop, observation point. You sort of reset everything to zero, and then from that you can use your observation to watch the mind as it begins to stir, and it will stir really quickly. So no matter how hard you try to be calm and still, you'll notice it moves or rises, and I'll explain a little bit about that. This is not to be avoided necessarily, nor is it to be seen as my practice is not good. All you're doing now is paying attention to your mind. Now normally the mind is stirring all the time, walking, standing, sitting, even sleep, but we don't pay attention to it. Here what you're doing is allowing yourself to pay attention to it, getting to know your own mind. Hi, I haven't met you before. So this is what you're doing. Like you're invited into the inner house of the mind. It says, well, come in and let me show you my workshop where I create everything. Oh, there's that desire. Oh, there's that fear. There's that, oh, wow, you're good at this. So you're going into the workshop of the mind, and what you're doing is when the mind, and by this I mean your thoughts, these are ideas, emotions. This is the stuff of the mind. These are the objects of mind. These are the creations of mind. Thoughts, emotions, imagery, images, feelings, memories, fantasies. Basically, it's called the monkey jumping all over the place. We could add to this list, okay? It could be your pretensions. It could be your plans. It could be unconscious impulses that arise, urges. All of these things are the mind stirring, okay? And this is what calls moves, when the mind moves. There's a moving. Now, what you do at this point is you don't repress that, nor do you just give in to it and say, oh, that's an ugly feeling. Where did that come from? Oh, I'm so bad. Or, that's a really good feeling. I hope I can hold on to it. You don't do either. You don't repress it, and you don't try to indulge it. When it arises, you try to just identify it. And what I say is identify its parentage. Who's the father and mother of this? What? Okay, this thought, this image, this urging, where did it come from? What? Oh, that's interesting. And it's coming from one of your 5 parents. Oh, you say, well, in California it's possible to have 5 parents. And when I grew up in the Midwest, I went, do. But here we're talking about metaphorically, the 5 parents are the 5 skandhas. Okay? And from the 5 skandhas, they generate little babies, you know. There's physical phenomena, both external and internal, that are generated as awareness of the physicality, the materiality. That's form, rupa. But then there's 4 associated with the mind: feelings, cognitions, samskara, and consciousness itself. So each one of these generates babies. We call these. So what you're trying to do is, which one of these is generating this living being? I call them babies. The texts call them living beings. So when Hui Neng says, cultivation is nothing more than crossing over, liberating the living beings of your own nature, this is what he's talking about. These living beings are our thoughts, our memories, our impulses, our urges, our longings, our habitual tendencies. They're all in there. Rupa, Vedana, Samja, Samskara, Vijnana. These are the little generators of these living beings of our nature. And so what you do, you go in and say, who or what gave rise to this living being? So not just watching it. The first exercise, you watched it arise, and you took note and said, is there anything lasting and permanent in this feeling, longing, urging? And you would see, I think, as most people do, that it comes and goes. It is impermanent. It has no substance of its own. That is the first liberating step for the laboratory exercise. But the next one is to get a little closer of, okay, so it comes and goes, comes and goes. Is this just going to go on endlessly? Which is another meaning of samsara, going on endlessly in this fashion. Or is there some way I can get a handle on this, interrupt this flow, and take charge of this, and maybe change the stream, or reverse the stream? But how would I do that without some analysis of knowing who gave birth to this one? So then you go in, and what I use here is a language, you tag it and then return to centering. So this urge, this longing, this impulse, this fear, whatever comes up, you actually tag it. I'm thinking almost scientifically. You just put the tag on and says, this is species, genus, so-and-so, from such and such. No judgment. This is one's good, it's bad. No. You just tag it, okay? And then you don't repress or hold on to it. You simply observe, identify, and let go. Observe, identify. This is really important because in often of these you'll find all the klesha are listed. Now, we've gone through the list of klesha, but you'll notice that each one's a living being. There's greed, there's anger, there's delusions, there's jealousy, there's envy, there's avarice, there's laziness, and so forth. And they all come up. And you tag them and call them what they are. Don't mistag them. Okay? I don't know how to say this. Oh, that's not so bad. You're okay. A little greed. It's not really anger, it's righteous indignation. No, just tag the damn thing. Tag it and call it what it is. Almost if it's not yours. Okay? It's somebody else's. Well, I'll tag yours. Okay? So you want to have that objectivity to call it out for what it is. And then let it go. The word I use here for people who are familiar with this, some of you are Buddhist and you would not be familiar with this, but where I grew up it was very catch and release. Okay? So when you do fishing, there's fishing you catch, core, fry, and eat. But there's also something called catch and release. You just catch it and you have a hook that's not barbed and you release the fish and let it go again. Okay, so this is called catch and release. You catch this little living being and you release it. So meditation here is more investigative, almost analytical, closer to considering versus emptying. It's not just emptying prematurely, it's considering, observing, taking note. And this is the first stage of what Hui Neng calls knowing yourself. Or he calls it recognizing your own mind and seeing your nature. Recognizing your own mind and seeing your own nature. So your own mind and your own nature is inhabited by the living beings that have been created out of this attachment, this delusion, and so forth. This is your family. This is your progeny. Okay? And so, not somebody else. You can't say, oh, it's only because of my parents I have this. I'm going to go to a therapist and, beat my parents on the pillow and then I'll be, no. It's actually coming from your own mind, your own creation. So part of the maturity of this exercise, and it's a bittersweet thing, you actually go into your mind ground, you go into this and say, okay, here's home. Let's see what I've done. Here's my garden. Let's see what I planted, and so on and so forth. And again, you need at this point to avoid all judgmentalism. Any kind of passing judgment on yourself. Just analytically, objectively say, here's what it is. Don't cover it over. Don't exaggerate it. Just call it what it is. Own it in the sense that recognize that this came about through my body, mouth, and mind karma. These are the living beings of my nature. And now I have some work to do. First of all, I'm going to give them all names. Okay? I'm going to tag them and call them what they are. Some of them have many names. Okay? Some of them are mysterious. But you'll find if you look into them, they have an origin. They have a paternity. And you can go and nail them. And once you start to do that, then you don't hang on to them. You just sort of recognize them. And that's the next stage of this. It's the beginning of the crossing over, but you can't begin to cross over unless you really recognize and call them. And again, you can't do that unless you just relax and don't get so hard on yourself or easy on yourself and just go in there almost like it's somebody else's ground that you want to explore to really help make them free and perfect as best you can. So you've got to be kind to yourself and also brutally honest. If you can see the two, these are not opposites, right? And nobody else can do this work for you. I mean, I would ask people to point out my faults, and I usually point out people that flatter me. They're the most perceptive. So I find people that are, mostly enamored by me, want something from me, and says, could you, in your wildest imagination, find something wrong with me? No, nothing at all. Thank you. You're really a good friend. I don't know what I'd do without you. Nor do you want people who are out to, grind an axe with you, who want to get even. Well, now that you've asked, and they take out this litany that they prepared, what you basically want is a unflinching mirror. And that's why wisdom is sometimes called a mirror, because in that mirror, you can see things as they really are. And you look at yourself in this mirror, and you examine yourself, and you get to know all these living beings. Now, what's interesting about this, and we won't go much more tonight on the process, but we've gone from the first stage is just seeing these things arise and realize they have no substance of their own. They are passing phenomena. Fine. Now we're going to the next phase and saying, this is what makes me what I am right now. What I think I am is a sum total of all these things. Now, they're also passing, they're impermanent, but they seem to be recurring. And so I never can get out of this. How do I get free if he says free of the skandhas? I have to go in there and untie each one of these knots. Each one of these is a snare or a knot, and I have to go. But I have to know who they are, how they came about, what their causes and conditions are, what sustained them, and thus begins the process of knowing yourself and self-reflection. And sometimes what's amazing, just by identifying them, they lose an incredible amount of power. And sometimes they even disappear just for being called out. Sometimes they come back. They come back with their lawyers and their attorneys. They come back and they justify and they really go at it. Or they transmute into something else. There's like, you nailed, okay, I have this desire for food. I am a foodie. I'm so addicted to food. I am gonna, and you call it out and you explain, and you go on this fast and that, you got it, and you say, done. And all of a sudden you look over here. Now, this desire for fame has arisen. It wasn't there before. What happened? Well, that's how they sort of transform. So it could be fondness for food turns into fondness. You push down fame, then it's sex. You put down sex, and then it's wealth. You put down wealth, and you think, I just want to sleep. So, you push around. So it's like a balloon, a water balloon. You squeeze it in one end, you think, oh, I got it. Oops, what happened here? So sometimes it takes a little while to not just identify and tag, but begin the process of a gradual transformation of it. The transformation. And this is where patience is required. It will be transformed if you set your mind, but the pace and the speed of this is not fixed. But as long as you're constant and steady, it's just like water on a rock. Eventually, it will wear down even the hardest rock. You were going to ask a question?
Yeah, I was wondering if you can give an example of one of those recurring thoughts or obsessions, whatever they may be, and especially around their origination. Because I see it intrinsically like tied to the exterior world, you know what I'm saying? So like it would be something that someone else did that would cause me to have this. And so like when we take that away, when we take the external away from the internal, then what does origination in that obsession look like?
First of all, these are described as aggregates. They work in very quick togetherness. It's not like, but you try to isolate them for analytical reasons. But secondly, the whole field of our experience is an interaction of these five as they interpret, project into the external. So in a sense, what we call the external world is an interactive. It's not like there's an external world and these are internal. This is describing the interactive reality that we live in. That, it's not like I have my mind and there's that outside world. But I was going to spend some time on it because neuroscience itself has gotten rid of this completely. The latest neuroscience is suggesting what we call reality is an interactive phenomena between our consciousness and external events and whatnot. It's not a fixed thing of this and that. And so the Buddha was saying this in a much earlier time. What he means by everything is made from the mind alone doesn't mean you literally create material objects, but your interpretation, your understanding, your framing of what they mean is completely a construction between your mind. And so often what you see as coming at you is just a reverberation of something you put out. For example, if I am filled with racist thoughts, me and others, and inferior or superiority, then I look at somebody else who's different than me, and immediately I say, there's a problem, they are causing this, and so on and so forth. If I do not have that discriminating bifurcation, then I see there's another person. There's another person like me. Same way if you're filled with ideas of lust and craving, insatiable sexual energy, everything you look at, man, woman, and sometimes trees becomes objects of your desire. Oh, look at that car. Whoa. And, or that food, and you look at somebody, whether it's man or woman, it doesn't matter. You look at, they're objects of your desire. They become either potential satisfiers of your desire or frustrations of your desire. Now, if that desire, that craving, or that fire is not there in you, what do you see? What do you behold? You behold just people. Without that, or you behold objects that may or may have some use or something, but you don't, as Freud said, fetish them and turn them into these incredibly exaggerated things for your... So you see, it's like we say, well, the outside and whatnot, but it's not like an either or. And the subtlety of this contemplation is you start to see how these triggers and creations going on inside have reverberations to create an outside that then comes back and feeds this loop again. You can't, in this sense, what he's saying, knowing for yourself, the only ground you have to really make the transformation is on that ground itself. That's where you begin. Would it have a corresponding effect in the outside world? If this theory is right, it certainly would, almost immediately without you wishing it to. For example, if you do not have these thoughts and these longings or these hatreds, actually the type of energy you put into the world is completely different and immediately affects other people. Just whoever you're living with, when they come home without saying a word, what's on their mind, what's in their bodies, radiates out to you immediately. You say, I don't know. Well, the dog knows. The dog looks and says, I'm out of here, man. Right? So this sense of we have this conscious ability between inner and outer and self and others there's an artificial dichotomy here. And as long as we stay in that dichotomy, we don't expand the full measure of our consciousness. But the readings are there all the time. Now, we tend to want to blame others and credit ourselves for things. But in fact, it's much messier and much more osmotic, if you will. There's a membrane that's hardly a membrane at all between our thoughts, our words, and our actions and those of others. So for better or for worse, we are in an interconnected reality. And this is just the beginning of trying to get to the root of the level of which you're in a creative role and starting to examine this. There's no time tonight. I wanted to spend some more time on the neuroscience because it's very interesting, but it says basically the same thing. This idea of an eternal, permanent, unchanging self entity is not true. It doesn't exist. Now, the Buddha said that, but the neuroscience is saying it's a construction, it's a fabrication of consciousness with objects and so forth, and it's constantly changing, but there's no sort of immutable soul or self there. Now, that is not religious at all. I just say, and I was going to share tonight, but I can't because there's no time, but I got kind of excited about this today because I was thinking, where have I heard this before? Where have I heard this before? And I was thinking, yeah, when I was a freshman in college, I read Heraclitus. And Heraclitus is a pre-Socratic philosopher. And I thought, wow, I'm going to go back. So I went back to my Heraclitus today. This is what I do on Fridays. I went back to my Heraclitus and I got really into it because he was saying so many things that are almost identical with what the Buddha was saying. And I was going to share them next week. I'll share some of this with you. It's really interesting.
Now?
But they didn't know each other. And yet they were contemporaries.
Can you share now?
They were, I could share. Let me share one. Let me see if I can find one. Well, this one's really cool. Let's see. The Buddha said we're born drunk and die in a dream, right? We're born drunk and die in a dream. We're completely unaware. This is Heraclitus. People fail to notice what they do when they're awake, just as they forget what they do while asleep. Most people live as if they had their own private understanding. Ooh. So again, you look at the Buddhist thing, we're unaware, we're unconscious of, and the contemplation here is to make us aware of that, but most people live in a private understanding. This is me and that's mine. This is not me and that's not mine. And we live in this private, and every one of us is in a private world. It's the one true and only world. Mine is, and yours is. They do not necessarily intersect. But we all think we are the center of the universe. I'm sorry, it's true. It wasn't just when I was 3 and went to kindergarten. I was shocked to find out there were other little things running around that thought they were the center of the universe. They weren't. I was the center of the universe. But even though we grow older, we don't really lose that notion. And so that's what he's saying. Most people live as if they had their own private understanding. We live in these bubbles of, the 5 skandhas of our own making and think that's everything, and everything is seen through that. And so he's just saying, that's just one example. There's many more I was discovering today. It's really quite amazing. They were contemporaries but didn't know each other. He was in what was Greece at the time. At that time would have been Ephesus, which is probably part of Turkey now, and the Buddha was in India. So there's no, I'm not saying they channeled each other, okay? And they didn't have any communication, but right at the same time in different places they came up with very similar. When the Buddha says everything is impermanent, Iche Wu Chang, this is Heraclitus says everything is impermanent. He says that's why he chose fire as his primary element, because fire is constant change and transformation. And he's the one that said no person can put their leg in the river. Let's see, I'll give you the quote exactly so I don't misquote him. Just want to get it right because I had to look at the Greek. You cannot step twice into the same river. Now that's pretty trippy. That's something the Buddha would have said. You cannot step twice into the same river. Why? Because when you step in and you pull out, the river has moved on and you step in and again, it's a different molecules and so on and so forth. But then, I often used to say, when I was a freshman and sophomore, because I just read the Buddha, and said, yeah, but the Buddha would say, you can't even put the same foot in the river. Because your foot has changed. And I thought, boy, and then I just read Heraclitus today. He was ahead of me. He actually anticipated this. But he did it in his funny language. And his funny language, we're discovering, wasn't because he was trying to be funny. He was a philosopher who believed that understanding was only half the game. Experiencing was the other half. So he used language that would cause you to have this reaction so that you would experience a liberation rather than just think you understood it. This goes back to a philosopher who's just passed away called Pierre Hadot. Hadot had the same idea that early Western philosophy was transformative. It was meant to change you and not simply to edify you with concepts. Therefore, it came complete with contemplative or spiritual exercises that were meant to shift your consciousness. That has been lost in modern philosophy departments, Hadot argued. The transformative. So, this is what Heraclitus was trying to do. People said, well, he speaks enigmatically, he upsets me. And Heraclitus says, I made my point. In other words, it's not the content of what I'm saying, it's the character transformation that occurs when you hear this. So here's his line. We both step and do not step in the same rivers. We are and are not. Whoa, well, wait a minute. It's very similar to the Buddha. We are and we are not. So we'll think about that for next week and explain a little more. But it has to do with this sense of the constant flux and he said, he learned this by observing himself, not through any teacher, and by observing the world. He just went out and watched and observed, not from books, not from metaphysics. And he said, let's just use this as a contemplation next night. Where in your observation is there anything that you can observe or experience that does not change? Just for next week. Where in your ordinary experience of the next week is there anything that you can encounter or experience that does not change? This is Heraclitus' main point. And he says, if you do, bring it to me and I'll take you as my teacher. So that's it. If you want to be Heraclitus' teacher, bring back something that doesn't change. And don't be smart-ass and say, oh, there's only one constant, change. All right, don't do that. Okay, any announcements?
So tomorrow, as usual, we have a sutra lecture, 7:30 p.m. Jean Fosher, one of our monks from this monastery, will give the lecture on Infinite Light Sutra. And all the classes goes as usual, so you can find more information in our website, berkeleymonastery.org. And see you next Friday for other classes.
And we're going to do the transference in English, which is another exercise in acknowledging interconnectivity, if you think about it. Because what we're doing is, in our intentionality, trying to take whatever goodness came from this evening's gathering and let it go out, to others. So that's basically the idea of transference. And we're going to do it in English.
May believe in thee, our minds as one and radiant with light, share the fruits of peace, with hearts of goodness, luminous and bright. If people hear and see how hands and hearts can find in giving unity, they are minds awake to great
compassion, wisdom, and to joy. May kindness find reward. May all who sorrow leave their grief and pain. May this boundless light break the darkness of our endless night. Because our hearts are one, this world of pain turns into paradise. May all become compassionate and wise. May all become compassionate and wise. Bowing respect to the triple jewel.